So you may be wondering, what's with all the new branding and the superhero theme? I feel like I was watching the Drone Geek and now I feel like I'm in my kid's bedroom. The simple answer is there is no reason. I like superheroes, I like comic books, so I thought, let's give the channel a spin. Also, I shortened the intro. You're welcome. What's up? It's Chris, the Drone Geek, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk Drones. Today, we are just over a week removed from the giant announcement from DJI about their FPV-style drone, and it has flipped the market on its head. Nobody knows what to think about this thing. You've got girlfriends kicking boyfriends out onto the street. You've got brothers blocking brothers on Facebook. Hell, your Uncle Joe, who's been flying fixed wing since 1981, he's posting about the latest addition to DJI's lineup of drones, and he ain't happy. Or maybe he is. I don't know. That's the crazy thing, is not many people know how to feel about this drone. That's why I decided not to buy into the hype. I decided to just take a step back and go, let's figure out whether this thing is worth it or not by watching other people go through the trial and error of all of the things that come with a new drone that's been released for the very first time. This is the first iteration of the FPV drone from DJI. After taking in a bunch of information over the past week from reviews that I've watched and articles that I've read about this drone, I wanted to break down some of the specs for you and then talk to you about 5 reasons why you shouldn't buy the DJI FPV drone. First things first, let's talk about the specs for this drone. First of all, it has a 1/2-inch CMOS sensor. It's the same as the Mavic 2 Zoom, Mavic Mini, Mavic Mini 2, etc. Number 2, its max video settings are 4K at 60 frames per second. That's solid, and we're gonna jump into that in a little bit. Number 3, there's a D-Cinelite color profile. That was a big win for this drone. Number 4, Rocksteady available for cleaner footage. Now there's a reason that Rocksteady's been implemented into this particular drone's camera programming, and we'll also talk about that later in the video. Actually, number 5 touches on why they implemented Rocksteady. There's an adjustable single-axis gimbal for this FPV style drone. Number 6, there are 3 flight modes: normal, sport, and manual. Number 7, there's an obstacle avoidance system. That's a big up for an FPV drone. Number 8, there's a return to home function, which is new for FPV drones. And number 9, it has a single-handed motion controller, which is really cool. We're not gonna be talking about it in this video because I have no experience with it, but I've seen videos and it seems like it's got mostly positive reviews. And these are all really solid specs for this drone. It makes it super enticing at first glance. Heck, it makes it enticing after second, third, fourth, the bajillionth glance. And as a DJI enthusiast, I was originally really pumped for this drone. I was excited to see what it had to offer. But over the past week, as I've learned more, that excitement has dwindled down to just sort of indifference over it. Actually, indifference is a little bit mild. I've had some reservations about whether or not I should buy this drone, and I'm going to share all 5 of those reservations with you right now, starting with number 1, the build on this drone is not crash friendly. Now, I am not an FPV pilot yet, but I do know a few things from talking to people that do fly FPV regularly, and one of those things is FPV drones are supposed to be built to take a beating. If you talk to anybody that has a custom-made, a homemade FPV style drone, they will attest to how tough their drone is. I've seen some of these drones fall from 100 feet in the air and at full speed hit a concrete surface, and they come up like champs. They might have a broken propeller or something might need tightened, but most of the time they can take one to the face and get right back up and start swinging again. FPV drones are typically able to handle hard impacts. However, DJI's FPV drone has proven otherwise. Now, after seeing the actual body of the drone, I definitely thought that there were going to be some issues in terms of its longevity as it continues to take bumps and bruises while being flown. The arms on this drone just don't look like they're up to snuff. Is the fuselage a little tougher than maybe the Mavic 2 or the Phantom? Absolutely. It is built to be a little bit tougher than the RTF drones that DJI has already put out. But overall, this body is weak when it comes to FPV style drones. And my suspicions on the toughness of this drone were all but confirmed over the past week, as I've seen photo after photo of these drones completely obliterated, and most of the photos come with a story where the drone really didn't hit that hard. Now, that's scary enough on its own, but what's even scarier is the price tag that comes with repairing and replacing the DJI FPV drone. That brings us to point number 2. DJI is being salty about the repair and replacement costs for the DJI FPV drone. All right, so you get the FPV drone, and you're not a stranger to the way that the extended warranty works with DJI. You know you have to purchase DJI Care Refresh in order to be covered for repairs and replacement of your drone. That's a given. So you go ahead and do that, and everything's easy peasy hunky-dory, right? Wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. To give you some perspective, the Mavic 2 Zoom is currently priced around $1,200. That's about as close as we're going to get to the DJI FPV price tag, unless you add in the Mavic Air 2 with the Fly More combo. We're not talking about that. We'll talk about the Zoom versus the FPV. For the DJI Mavic 2 Zoom, to buy the Care Refresh is $150 up front. After that, you get up to 2 replacement drones. The first replacement drone is $119, and the second, $139 smackaroos. All in all, with the Mavic 2, you could conceivably get 2 replacement drones totaling $400 additional on top of the money you spent for the original drone. You flip over to the DJI FPV. To buy the DJI Care Refresh is $199. It's already a little more expensive up front to buy the Care Refresh for the FPV drone versus an RTF drone. But then you get into the replacement costs, and that's where it gets wild. You still get up to 2 replacements for the DJI FPV. However, the first replacement, 259 Washingtons. The second one, 279 smackaroos. What the is happening? I mean, what kind of is DJI smoking with these price tags? Whatever it is, kids, stay away from it, because that's the kind of shit that lands you in Skid Row. Like, holy fucking shit. You have to pay $740 to get 2 replacements of the FPV drone, which you know is gonna crash more than an RTF drone. That's nearly double the cost of what the Mavic 2 Zoom would be. It is bonkers. These people are on something, and I don't wanna know what it is. Now, is it a perfect one-to-one comparison? No. Obviously, the FPV drone is built differently than a Mavic 2 or any other RTF drone, but the fact of the matter is, the value that you get from either one balances each other out, and you find that common price tag of $1,200, and all of a sudden, that Care Refresh just doesn't make as much sense unless you're on DJI's side of the table, where all of a sudden, you see more and more crashes of this drone, so you think, I'm gonna make a quick buck off of this. And you go ahead and jack those prices up for the replacement program. It's insane. Like, it averages out to $370 per replacement drone. And I know that that's not $1,200 for a brand new drone without the Care Refresh, but it's also not $200 like you get with the Mavic 2. Moving on. Number 3, the camera is impressive right now, but what happens when it's not? We touched on the specs of this camera at the beginning of this video. The 2 most notable are the 1/2-inch CMOS sensor and the maximum 4K at 60 frames per second in terms of resolution. But let's go over some of the cons of this camera. First of all, the camera's gimbal is only single axis, which means you're gonna be covered in one direction when you move the drone up and down, but when you move it side to side, you're gonna lose that stability. Even with the Rocksteady, you're not gonna get the same level of professional shot cinematic footage that you will with a Phantom or a Mavic or an Inspire, whatever. Now, you could still consider this a positive because most FPV drones don't have a gimbal at all, but the bottom line is DJI is marketing this as a hybrid FPV/cinematic RTF drone, and when you don't have that flexibility with a multi-axis gimbal, you're gonna start to lose cinematic quality on the footage that you capture. Next, 4K at 60 frames per second is really good. In fact, that's what they needed for the camera to be able to keep up with the pace of the drone. This drone tops out at 90 miles an hour in manual mode, so you need a higher frame rate to be able to keep up with the camera feed, and it's also going to give you much smoother cinematic feeling footage as you're moving very fast over a landscape. However, while this camera is impressive now, and it will be for the foreseeable future, what happens when it's not? On a homemade FPV drone, you can take the camera that you put on off and replace it with the latest and greatest model. For instance, most people put GoPros on top of their FPV drone, and when the GoPro 8 or 7 or 6 or whatever they were using went out of style, they were able to upgrade to the latest one, the 9, and get really smooth 5K cinematic level footage. As it stands right now, you cannot do that with the DJI FPV drone. You are stuck with the onboard camera. Again, that is not a now problem. Right now, it is toward the top of the food chain. You're not gonna have any issues with resolution quality in the immediate future. But a few years down the road, that could be a problem, because as time progresses, you're starting to see more camera manufacturers move away from marketing that 4K level of resolution, and they're starting to worry about the 5K and the 6K and now even the 8K. We're moving towards a future where the resolution of 8K is going to start to be an industry standard, and you're going to start to move away from the 4K. Is it going to happen tomorrow? No. Is it going to happen this year? Absolutely not. But could it happen in the next 5 years? Yeah, I think so. And 5 years for a drone isn't a terrible lifespan, but the fact of the matter is, you're still gonna have to upgrade from the DJI FPV to the DJI FPV 2, if that's what they call it or whatever they decide to call it, rather than just swapping out your $300 action cam with the same resolution for another $300 or $400 action cam that's got even better resolution. Short game, not a factor. Long game, huge factor. Number 4, it's got a lot of training wheels. So I think it's actually good that DJI implemented training wheels on this drone, because the fact of the matter is, every DJI nut was gonna go out and buy this drone anyway. You might as well try to protect them, the drone, and anybody that's around while that drone is being flown by putting some safety protocols in it in the form of their 3 flight modes, plus some other features as well. Let's talk about those 3 flight modes. The first one is normal mode, and essentially what this is flying this drone like you would any other RTF drone by DJI. You put it up in the air and it handles almost exactly like a Mavic. You've got the position hold, you've got GPS location, you've got obstacle avoidance sensors, you've got everything you need to protect yourself, the drone, and the people around you. The second mode is sport mode, which is truly like a hybrid scenario where you have the FPV experience in the flight. It handles a little bit more loose. It handles like a sports car, sports mode, for instance, but you still have some of the safety features in obstacle avoidance, return to home, and even some position hold when it comes to sports mode. And then you move on to flight mode number 3, which is manual, which is essentially going full acro with an FPV style drone. You do have some features that still protect you, but overall you're taking the training wheels off when you get into FPV mode. Chris, why does that sound bad, huh? Let me tell you why. It's not so much that I am against protecting people while they're flying an FPV style drone. I think training wheels to a point are good. However, what's going to happen, inevitably, is we're going to have a bunch of ego-driven DJI fanboys. Now keep in mind, I identify as a DJI fanboy, so don't get offended. That are gonna go out and think that they're good enough to fly FPV. This was never an issue when the original RTF drone came out. When DJI started making drones, there was no argument. FPV pilots have a much higher level of skill and dexterity than those of us that fly RTF. I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but it's true. If you fly exclusively RTF, you sort of have it easy. But now you've got this ability for somebody to go out and purchase an FPV style drone that allows them to ease into FPV flying, and it could be a recipe for disaster. You're essentially giving somebody that really has no clue what goes into flying an FPV style drone, a drone that can fly 90 miles an hour. That is an object this big that can go 90 miles an hour in one direction. That's equivalent to giving a chimpanzee a rocket launcher at a carnival-style shooting gallery, or letting your drunk buddy eat the entire Taco Bell menu and then trusting that he won't blow out his underpants on the way home. I'm not saying that nobody can learn to be a legitimately skilled FPV pilot through DJI's system. I think it's going to happen. However, I think at a far greater rate, people are going to just go out, think they have what it takes, put these things in the air, and endanger a lot of people around them because they really don't have the skill to do it. I'm a huge proponent of doing things the old-fashioned way, the school of hard knocks. You build your drone from the ground up, your FPV drone from the ground up, understand it, crash it a few times, learn from those experiences, good, bad, and ugly, and become a better pilot for it. You don't take your training wheels off of your bike and become Matt Hoffman. It just doesn't happen that way. You crash your bike, you take some bruises, and you learn to ride your bike better. And then someday, after lots and lots of practice, maybe you can be Matt Hoffman. And number 5, it's only good for getting a very specific type of shot. The 5th and final reason you should not buy the DJI FPV is probably the one that caused me to go, this really isn't a good fit for me. When it comes to cinematography and getting a very cinematic shot with your drone, the DJI FPV has one strength in this category: covering a very great distance in a very short amount of time. That's it. This drone goes 90 miles an hour, so it is obviously the better choice over an RTF drone like the Mavic 2 for getting a shot where you have to cover a lot of ground in a very short time window. Otherwise, you might as well just go get an RTF drone, because the FPV is not going to be good at getting very slow, subtle movements. It's not going to be good at getting those nice pan shots, and it's really not going to produce footage that's stable to any cinematic type of level. If you are trying to get professional level cinematic footage from your drone, you need to understand that the DJI FPV is not going to easily give you that experience. Is it possible? Absolutely, it's possible. If you're a good enough pilot, you can get just about any shot with the FPV. Is it the most efficient way to do it? Absolutely not. When it comes right down to it, it may be harder to fly the FPV drone, but the bottom line is you have to work smarter, not harder. So if you need a shot that doesn't necessarily require that you go super fast screaming down this landscape, well then maybe just stick with the Mavic or the Phantom or whatever you choose to use. Once you come to terms with the fact that the DJI FPV drone is very one-dimensional when it comes to getting cinematic footage, it's going to diminish that urge that you have to go out and impulse buy it. Just trust me. Once I came to terms with it, the attractiveness of this drone went down significantly. And there you have it. 5 reasons why you should not buy the DJI FPV drone. Do I think this is a bad piece of aerial imaging equipment? Absolutely not. What I think is happening is this is getting hyped up too much. They're trying to build it up like this all-encompassing piece of aerial imaging equipment when really it's no better than a supplemental piece of equipment. You're going to use this to get very specific types of shots, outside of just flying it for fun. But when we're talking about cinematic purposes, you've got one shot you can get with this that you can't get with any other drone. If you want my opinion, and maybe you don't, but here it is. If you're gonna get into FPV, do it the right way. Learn how to build the drone. Learn how all of the electronic components work. Learn how the parts play into flying it one way versus the other, bringing it down, going up, how the throttle works, how the controller communicates with the drone. Learn all of those things because it'll make you a better pilot for it. Take your knocks, take your licks, build your drone, and continue improving upon your skills the right way. Don't just go directly out of the box. You're not gonna be a much better pilot for it, and your ceiling is gonna be much lower than somebody that takes the time to learn the craft. That was a double entendre. You're welcome. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like down below. And if you really liked this video, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you have, share this video out to your friends that you know would enjoy it and tell them to subscribe to the channel. This is your second reminder to go ahead and leave a like and hit that subscribe button. And until next time, I'm Chris, the Drone Geek, and I am out of here.